Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're at the range with the new Zastava M91, let's call it a designated marksman's rifle. This rifle is just recently introduced by the newly founded Zastava USA. Previously, Zastava firearms were brought in by another importer. Now they've set up Zastava USA to bring these firearms in under their own brand name. This thing caused quite the stir when they announced they were going to bring it in. It is the new Serbian, again, DMR rifle, and it is intended to replace the older M76 that was manufactured in the former Yugoslavia as their extended range DMR type rifle. This thing, like the Romanian PSL, is a stretched out AK. It is oftentimes confused with rifles like the SVD or their Chinese counterparts. This is not an SVD. This is more like the Romanian PSL. The original M76 that it replaces was an 8mm caliber, which was the old German caliber from World War II that was used in the Kar 98 and MG42 and other weapons like that of that era. So this thing is part of a modernization program. Let me spit that word out there for you. And so this is actually a issued rifle in the Serbian military. So it's chambered in 7.62 by 54R, and it uses a magazine that looks just like a PSL magazine. And I do have my early import PSL out here, and I'll do a comparison, just a brief comparison in terms of visually what the quality difference looks like between the two rifles. But yeah, on top it has a POSP 4x24mm scope. It does have an illuminated reticle. We'll talk more about the scope later in the video. And it has updated polymer type furniture, which looks like the furniture that I have on my PSL, which is actually brought in by a company called, I believe, Black Horse Arsenal or something like that back in the day. They don't bring it in anymore. So this is very similar to what I upgraded my PSL to, but you also notice that it has 1913 rails on the top and the bottom. They are very robust handguards, very, very durable feeling, and nothing moves around whatsoever on the rifle. So we'll delve more into that. We'll talk about the adjustable gas system. We'll talk about the muzzle, the lack of a muzzle device except a barrel nut, and then we'll take the gun apart and take a look at it on the inside and see what makes it tick. So let's get started. We've already zeroed the rifle. Today we're going to be shooting some Wolf Military Classic. It's a 140 grain ball round, and we've seen good accuracy with this ammo at times, and other times we've seen pretty abysmal accuracy. This is all we have out here right now. This is more or less a first shots video, and we'll try some different flavors of match ammunition later, and we'll see how it compares to the PSL, and I might bring out the old NDM86, the Chinese version of the Soviet SVD, later on for a side-by-side comparison. All right, guys, in terms of accuracy, let's go ahead, chamber some ammo here. Like I said, we previously zeroed it. I was able to zero it in a couple of magazines. And we'll talk more about this scope here in the video. All right, perfect extraction ejection. The recoil is very moderate for a 7.62 by 54R. The gas system right out of the box certainly seems to be set to the right setting because it's not battering the rear trunnion. It's not beating my shoulder up whatsoever. So it seems properly gassed. We'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. In the magazine, I have some 148 grain Wolf. This is not the most accurate ammunition in the world. These rifles with this ammunition, about 4 minutes at 100 yards. It's not the most accurate. Now, with some match ammunition, you can start to bring those groups down. And we'll demonstrate that in another video when we do an accuracy comparison between this, the PSL, and perhaps a Vepr. Or I might even break out the NDM86. Charge it just like an AK. And let's go ahead and try our luck at 250 yards on our challenge steel target, which is a man-sized target. Miss. There we go. I'm pretty sure I'm seeing trace in this thing. The recoil jumps so badly that it comes off target, but I'm pretty sure I'm seeing some trace even through this little 4-power scope. When you're firing this thing off a rest, it has a very light trigger. Now you'll see that it's locked open because it's empty. Drop the magazine out, the bolt goes home. It is empty, so when you pull the trigger back, it's stagey, so it's gonna be a little bit gritty. It's gonna go to a shelf, and then immediately after that shelf, it's going to fire. So there's no trigger slap, and the trigger's surprisingly light, but when you fire this thing off a rest, make sure you pin that trigger to the rear, because if you try to shoot it like you might shoot a bolt action rifle, if you hold it very loosely and fire it, it's gonna bump fire and fire 2 or 3 rounds very quickly. So just for safety purposes, make sure you hold tightly onto the rifle. When you pull the trigger, hold it to the rear. Now also, the trigger has a very positive release, but also it doesn't feel like it's really got all that much over travel. As soon as it breaks, it kind of stops fairly quickly, just ever so slightly, some over travel present there. All right, yeah, very, very easy gun to shoot. The recoil impulse is, it gives you a good push. I wouldn't say it's abrupt, and it's very comfortable to shoot. Let's take a look at the scope that's on the rifle. The scope is a POSP scope, which is 4 by 24 millimeter. I believe that all the POSP scopes are manufactured in Belarus. You'll see these scopes on the US market, sold with different reticles and things like that. You can pick them up from various different online sources. Let's take a look at the adjustments. The adjustments are in meters, and it has a BDC on the top turret, which is your elevation adjustment. When you zero the scope, take the gun out of the box, start shooting it, figure out what your adjustments are, and dial those in. You can dial in up elevation there, and you can dial in left-right windage here. Once you get the scope set, more than likely, and that was the case with this one, it'll be at something like 800 meters high and like 5 clicks right. That's about where this one was. So once you've got the scope zeroed, now you're going to zero the turrets to the scope. Loosen these 2 screws. Do not take them out. Just loosen them. Once you loosen them, the silver ring down below, which has your range increments on it and is a detent, you can feel very positive clicks when you turn it. You're going to rotate the silver ring back to 0. The top ring should not turn. When this top ring turns, you're actually dialing in elevation or windage, depending on the knob, into the scope. So once you get it set back to 0, tighten these screws back down. Just snug them. Don't over tighten them, because you can break the scope very easily. And that's how you zero the scope. It's also an illuminated reticle. You'll have this protective bracket right here and a little rubber covered toggle switch. And it's very simple, on and off. All the markings on it, on the scope, are actually in English, which is nice. So you have up marked here and you have right marked here. So you can see that everything's marked clearly in English. Back here, you have a battery compartment, and you just unscrew this battery cap, and inside you'll put these A76 batteries. The polarity is negative to the rear here, positive facing that way. Now, the manual, I believe, says it uses 2 D13 batteries. I don't know if that's synonymous with A76s, but this is what came in the bag that the scope ships in. You'll also notice that it has a rubber eyepiece on it. Again, it favors a right-handed shooter because the eye cup is cut so that it will fit around your noggin there. It also acts as a protective device to keep you from dotting your eye on the metal housing of the scope. The 54R can have quite the punch to it, a little bit of push. I wouldn't say it's a sharp recoiling rifle, but it's got a nice push to it. And it'll be very easy if you get your eye relief wrong, get your eye too close to the scope, it'll bang you right in the eye. So this will prevent that from happening. And it's also, you can turn it to get it adjusted, but it's just a friction fit on the scope, or you can just take it off and just make sure you have the proper eye relief so you don't get dinged in the gourd by it. The scope came with this lens cover on the front and just the rubber eyepiece on the rear. It ships not installed to the rifle, and it comes in this little bag, and inside you're going to have a manual for the scope. You'll have something to wipe your lens off with, a lens cloth, tools to make sight adjustments, I would imagine, wrapped in wax paper, and then a paintbrush, which you can use to get dust off the lens. And that's everything that comes in there, including the batteries. Okay. I don't generally keep batteries in scopes. I don't oftentimes use illuminated reticles, but they certainly would have their use in low light conditions. And then putting the scope on the gun again, very simple. Just set it on there, push it forward, and then flip the lever, and it's locked in and does return to 0. When loading the magazine, you want to make sure that you put the round right about here, push down, then push back. What we're trying to avoid, what is called rim lock. Push down and then push back. The 54R has a rimmed case, which you can see it's very pronounced on the end of the case. And what you don't want to do is, I'm pushing this round slightly forward for demonstration purposes. If I set it in here with the rim behind the round below it and push down, it'll cause what's called rim lock. Now when the bolt goes to push this cartridge forward, see how it pushes 2 rounds? That causes malfunctions. So how you avoid that is by loading the way that I've shown you. Make sure the bottom round is pushed all the way back, put the round right about there, push down, and then push it back. And if you continue to do that for all 10 rounds, you'll never experience rim lock. This is my early import Romanian PSL. On it is a Black Horse Arsenal stock set. The reason I put the stock set on here is several-fold. First, it's more aesthetically pleasing than the laminate stocks that the rifle originally shipped with. And secondly, I can flip this lever and I can adjust the length of pull very easily. Also, the cheek rest here is actually useful. It puts your face at the right height to use the eye cup and the scope on the rifle. So this is really a nice touch. Taking a look at the M91, you have the same cheek piece and you can adjust it. It'll lock into that position. However, you'll notice there's a serious height difference between the two. This one has a much lower cheek piece. This cheek piece sets much closer to the scope. For me, I found that this is not useful in that position. It sets my cheek way too high to get a proper eye relief here with the scope, so I rotate it out of the way. It will lock in this position. You'll see it pop forward, but it does not lock into any other position except down, and I find that gets in the way of my shooting hand, so I just kind of rotate it off to the side. All right, you'll also notice, but I would say that these stocks are very, very durable. They're just not adjustable for length of pull either. Here you'll notice on the rear of the receiver of the M91 that you have 2 rivets here that you normally wouldn't see on an AK, and then you have a machined block on the rear end here. And this is where your top cover locks in and where your guide rod locks in. So this is a solid piece of steel. On the PSL, you have a reinforced rear trunnion that has additional sheet metal riveted around the rear of the receiver. So again, keep in mind, guys, both these rifles are just basically stretched out AK-47s. So the bolt velocity can be very high. That's why you're seeing these rifles reinforcing the rear trunnion so they don't batter that trunnion and come off the rifle or cause the rivets to stretch or something like that. So moving forward, you'll see that we have traditional AK controls on both. AK style charging handle. This bolt's in the white, this one's finished. You'll notice there's a slight difference in the cut on the bolt. Now, I would not go switching PSL parts with M91 and vice versa. The magazines, for example, between the two rifles look very similar, but you cannot take the magazines and expect them to work reliably in the rifles by putting M91 in the PSL and the PSL's magazine in the M91. Simply isn't a fit. So, continuing on, we have the rear sights on both rifles. This one is graduated to 1,000 meters. And it's adjustable like an AK. On here you have 1,000 meters as well. And you'll notice that both these rifles use scopes that are slightly offset to the left. And you have enough room where you can actually use the iron sights underneath the scope. Again, both rifles favor a right-handed shooter. With the M91, again, you'll notice that the rifle has the scope slightly offset to the left. And you can use the iron sights with the scope installed. Moving forward, you would normally have wooden handguards here on the PSL. I've replaced them with the Black Horse Arsenal stock set, which I think looks very sharp. Here on the M91, you have a very dense polymer Handguard has a nice flare at the bottom, good texturing, and 1913 rails on the bottom and the top. You can put a bipod on there, something like that, and I find that these handguards fit very, very well, very snugly to the rifle. Here you're going to see the gas systems on the two different rifles. I'm going to try to line these receivers up where they're almost equal here. And you can see where the gas block is and the gas tube. It looks as though the gas tube looks longer on here. I haven't measured them, but it might be an optical illusion. You'll notice that this has a much heavier barrel profile than the PSL, which is a lighter weight contour. And then we have AK front sights on both. The early M91s that came in have muzzle nuts welded in place. There's a little tack weld right there, and it has just a standard AK muzzle nut. Why they did that, I don't know. I don't know if that's an ATF regulation. The rifle should be compliant under US import laws because it's never had anything other than a pistol grip stock on it. It doesn't accept a magazine over 10 rounds. To my knowledge, nobody makes an extended magazine for these. So it's not like you can put more than 10 rounds in it. It would seem to be compliant, so I'm not sure why it has a muzzle nut. It could be some ATF ruling. They've been on a rip lately. We're going to make a video about that. So here on the PSL, you're going to see a very unique muzzle device on the PSL, and they pretty much all have that. So you can definitely see there's some family heritage going on here, that one is very closely resembling the other. Again, this was a replacement for the M76, which had a machined receiver. The M91 has a stamped receiver. The M76 was 8mm. This is 7.62 by 54R. So it's very interesting to see these two rifles side by side. The quality of the two, I would say just visually, the M91 shows a much higher attention to detail in the final finishing. The machining looks better. The finish definitely looks better. The internal components look better made. Now, I don't know that they're truly better because the PSL, even though it's an ugly duckling, has a reputation for being extremely durable. This thing may look prettier, but functionally, I can't say that there's any difference between the two because the PSL, despite its rather crude appearances, does the job. The M91 looks more refined. Now, also, these things are currently being re-imported into the US market. They disappeared there for a while. They're now coming in again, but they came in at a $2,000 price point. A lot of folks freaked out over that. The PSL just jumped in value. Then they announced the release of the M91, Zastava USA did, and everybody's really excited, and then they announced the price at $3,000, and if people were upset about $2,000, you can only imagine their response at the $3,000 price tag. Do I see $1,000 difference in terms of the quality or the accuracy? Not really, but this is a military rifle. It is currently being issued to the Serbian military from what I can tell, and that makes it very desirable for collectors. So if you have $3,000 burning a hole in your pocket, you may want to try to get one of these. They sold out of the initial shipment very, very quickly, even at the $3,000 price point. The M91 has a good feel to it. It does have a rather short length of pull, but I've become used to that, and it feels very solid when you shoulder it. There's no movement in the stocks whatsoever. The only thing is this thing can be a little bit annoying because it's not really useful on the gun. I'll do a little bit of shooting at 100 yards with some of the Wolf ammunition. Got 10 rounds loaded. Wow, it is stringing shots all over the place. It started to shoot high, which would explain my difficulty getting it on at 250 yards there at one point, and then it started to shoot lower. So it actually shot like probably a 6-inch or larger group at 100 yards with 10 rounds. So we've been struggling a little bit here this afternoon trying to keep the gun zeroed. And so we double checked the tensioner on the scope and how it clamps that side rail on the rifle, and we tightened that up a bit so it's definitely on there more securely. We were seeing vertical stringing, and that was telling me that something was probably loose somewhere because the vertical stringing was significant, and it did it twice back to back. And so we tightened up that mount and we started shooting. We started to see groups again. Now, again, if we're shooting 4 or 5 MOA, we're doing good with this particular ammunition, but it's not match ammo, and you really can't expect much better performance than that out of the 148 grain Wolf stuff, at least in my experience. So we got it all tightened down. We had to re-zero the rifle, and now we're going to give 250 yards another try. Now, at 100 yards, it looks like we're pretty much dead on. So we're going to try to stretch out just a little bit to 250 here. Have to aim low. I don't know where it's hitting again. There we go. Almost had it double up on me there. Hopefully you guys see some nice trace in that. So once again, I was trying to find my elevation and right hold. I figured it out, and I just having to hold just a little bit low and to the right, and I was able to get it onto the target. Now with the 4-power scope, I can't really see very clearly where I'm hitting, but you guys will be able to see where I was hitting with the camera that's on the spotting scope right now. Let's take it apart and see what it looks like on the inside. To field strip it, you're going to go ahead and make sure that the weapon's empty. Hit the magazine release here. You'll notice that it kind of protrudes a little bit on the right-hand side. It definitely favors a right-handed shooter, but you can easily hit that with your finger and the magazine will drop right out. Keep in mind that this magazine does allow the bolt to lock open on the last shot fired. So it will lock open, but the minute you take the magazine out, the bolt's going to slam home, just like it's the PSL that it resembles. All right, next we're going to take the scope off. And you just have a little lever here on the side. You're going to push up and pull back on this lever, and then the scope will come right off the side mount. In theory, and in a perfect world, that thing will go right back to 0. We'll test that here momentarily. Now I'm going to push in on the takedown button here on the rear and lift up on the top cover. It'll come off. Push forward on the recoil spring and draw the recoil spring and guide rod out of the rifle. Pull the bolt to the rear, all the way to the rear, then lift up, and then the bolt and carrier will come out. Rotate the bolt and it'll come off the carrier, and now you've pretty much field stripped the rifle. You can also lift this lever up and take the gas tube off if you would like. To do that, you can use one of the rails on the side of the carrier. It'll fit onto that little tab, which gives you a little bit more extra leverage. You can rotate that up, and now the gas tube comes off. Up here we have a puck, and it's set to 3. So this little puck, it's important that you remember your gas setting, because when you take the gas tube off, this thing can turn. The gas tube has a tiny spring here in the front that actually engages with this notched out area on the puck. From the factory, it should be set to 3. After 200 rounds are fired, you can set it to 2, which reduces the amount of gas the gun is getting. So once it breaks in a little bit, you can reduce the gas and it should operate on 2. It feels perfectly gassed for me at 3 right now. It doesn't seem to have too much recoil. All right, so you'll also notice here on the front of the gas piston, there are bleed holes on either side. There's one there by my index finger and one on the other side. If you look at the front of the gas piston, unlike a PSL, which has just a flat surface there, or an AK, it actually is hollow, so gas can go down here and vent on the side of the piston. So it's an interesting setup. It's different from the PSL in that regard. Go ahead and put the bolt back in the carrier. Just stick the bolt stem into the carrier, push forward and rotate. It'll extend. You'll want it that position when you put it back in the gun. Take your gas tube. Again, make sure that spring lines up with the puck. Stand up here so I can make sure I get this right. Okay, we got it on 3. I'm gonna rotate the lever down now. You may need to use the carrier once again for leverage. Okay, that's it in the locked position. Now I'm gonna push forward on the bolt and the carrier with my thumb, set the carrier into the rifle just like that, push down and forward. Now you can take the recoil spring and guide rod, insert that into the carrier, push this forward, and set it into its little rails there on the rear of the receiver. Take your top cover, line it up just like an AK, push forward and down. There it goes. And when that pops through, you're all set. Now we're going to take the scope, put it back on a side rail here, slide it forward, rotate the locking lever down until it locks, pull on it, make sure that it's all snug, scope shouldn't come off, and then do a quick function check. And the rifle is back together. Overall, it's a very nicely made rifle, and it shoots about how I expected it to shoot. At first, we thought we were going to have to do kind of a negative video because we're seeing that vertical shot stringing and we weren't quite sure what was causing it. By pulling on the scope, we couldn't tell that it was loose. It certainly seemed to be tightly fastened, but we went ahead and tightened down the clasp on the scope mount, reattached it to the rifle, and we shot quite a few groups and re-zeroed the scope, which was required, which tells me it was loose. And all of a sudden, we started to get our groups back. It wasn't stringing anymore. It was shooting a group. Granted, not the most accurate with the ammunition that we have out here today, but what we expected in terms of performance. Reliability, spot on. We've had no issues with the gun whatsoever. So it's perfectly reliable. The gas setting from the factory seems to be properly gassed, but once you hit 200 rounds, you can turn it down one click, reduce the amount of gas to the gun, and that will save the longevity of the rifle if you shoot it quite a bit. But I have a funny feeling you'd have to shoot these things quite a bit to actually break one. So again, overall fit and finish is certainly nice. Now you guys are going to say, but is it worth $3,000? Worth is subjective, guys. I can't tell you what is a good buy for you or isn't. All I can tell you is that the thing costs $3,000 and the next best product on the market is the PSL, and it's $1,000 cheaper. But to a military collector, the price is going to be less of a factor. They're just going to want it because they collect military small arms. And that's kind of the mindset that I'm in. So I'm glad that I had a chance to shoot the rifle. It's certainly been fun. We're going to bring it out a couple more times. We're going to shoot it while we have it with some match ammunition, compare it to some other rifles that are chambered in this 54R, and just see how it performs and give it a chance to actually shine and show us what it can do group-wise. We'll wait till another day and it's a little bit warmer. So guys, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel so we can bring you unbiased, as humanly possible information, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. It's critical to us because we are supported purely by you and through Patreon. So there's a link down below. Please follow that link and consider becoming part of our Patreon family. If you guys don't like Patreon, we also have Subscribestar. Again, please consider supporting the channel. Last but not least, please swing by and check out coppercustom.com. All right, guys, thanks for 11 years of support. We're going to sign off here with the last 10 rounds of the Wolf at 100 yards. Thanks again for watching, guys. That 54R hits like a ton of bricks, man. It is rocking that challenge target. We'll talk to you guys soon.